Sins of the Father starts by calling back to a Season 2 episode, A Matter of Honor, when Riker had to serve on a Klingon ship. Well, now a Klingon, Kurn, is going to be serving on the Enterprise. Kurn is yet another character played by the wonderful Tony Todd, who is respectful of Picard, but quickly gets ready to slap the crew into place for any lax behavior.
Do you wish to speak, Acting Ensign Wesley Crusher?
Permission to change my underwear, sir? Riker soon hears about Kurn.
He just doesn't seem to like me.
He learns fast, doesn't he? Geordi's got a similar complaint, and we learn most of the rest of the ship's been getting irritated with Kurn's stern command style, which he uses on everyone, with one exception, Worf, the guy whose alarm clock is getting hit in the face with a pain stick. Instead, Kurn is borderline condescending in his treatment of Worf. At one point, it seems Worf is ready to just punch him right there on the bridge. Well, Riker tries talking to Kurn about the situation in the turbolift on their way to a dinner with the senior officers, but Kurn is so offended that he has to resist the urge to kill Riker, which I understand. I had that urge many times in Season 1, believe me. Kurn's a bit taken aback by dinner being cooked, but he's willing to adapt out of politeness.
I shall try some of your burned, replicated bird meat.
That's Klingon for hoity-toity. It might be physical differences, and the reasons that humans cook food, with the obvious exception of raw food enthusiasts, isn't because they're wimps. It's theorized that doing so allows a significant portion of the food's energy to be absorbed, and thus likely the reason why humans have such powerful brains. It takes a lot of energy to run that. Klingons might have a different digestive system that can more easily break down raw food. That or they don't value brains too much. You never know with the Klingons. Anyway, this is a chance to discuss this arrangement.
As for my crew, it may be healthy to shake up the status quo occasionally.
In other words, Picard is the only one who doesn't have to put up with any crap from Kurn, and so is enjoying this immensely. Especially loved it when he managed to make Wesley wet himself using only a glare. Gotta teach me that sometime. Worf gets it again when Kurn comments that the food isn't agreeable to a Klingon's stomach while Worf is chowing down. Now, aside of the small bits with Worf, the plot seems pretty predictable and ultimately likely tedious. Dealing with the hard-ass new Klingon boss, probably with lessons learned along the way, yada yada yada, and probably worked out to be something mundane. But after dinner, when Worf goes to finally ask Kurn why he's treating him like this, that plot crashes into a brick wall.
That is the response of a Klingon. The response I would expect from my older brother.
Dun dun dun! Now, the long-lost sibling plot is usually pretty cliché. It's another thing that was forbidden by Strange New Worlds. Too lame for fan fiction. But in this case, there's a good reason for it, given Worf's backstory. And it indeed calls that into focus. Kurn is already a commander in the Klingon Empire. Worf is just a lieutenant in Starfleet. It's a reminder of what Worf likely could have achieved if not for that Romulan attack that killed his parents, and leaving him with a sore spot on his Klingon heritage. Having a question, well, that's Worf's berserk button. This is a vital part of this episode, how that experience shapes what Worf is. Kurn delivers the real plot. The first act stuff was just bullshit to see if Worf was a real Klingon, so that he could address the charge that their father was a traitor, that he helped give information to the Romulans for the attack on the outpost during which he had died. Worf explains this to Picard, and that if he fails in his challenge, well, he's going to be executed. So Picard says to hell with it. The big swinging dick of the Federation is going to go along to help him back up that challenge.
Sir,
We're changing course. Set coordinates for the first city of the Klingon Imperial Empire.
The Klingon Imperial Empire? That's a lot of Imperial references for a nation that doesn't even have an emperor. Anyway, the Enterprise flies there on behalf of the United Federation of Federally Federated Planets to see this issue, and Worf agrees to let Kurn be his Chadish or whatever, the guy who fights on Worf's behalf, because he won't be allowed to fight while he's making this challenge. But Worf insists that Kurn not reveal his true lineage in order to protect him, much to Kurn's irritation. But first, the Klingon homeworld. Might be hard to appreciate, but this was the first time we had ever seen it. The homeworld of a former enemy that we'd known about in the real world for close to a quarter of a century. So they worked to give it a real distinctive look. And it must have worked, too. They got an Emmy for art direction because of the Klingon stuff here. They went for a blend of Laos, Thailand, and Nepal to get a feel for the look of the thing, and redressed a lot of old sets to get the Klingon look that they were going for. This is where Worf arrives to make his challenge, but one of them, Duras, acts like a first-rate dick, challenging Worf's heritage. Picard deploys a low-yield Picard speech in Worf's defense, which helps, but Duras gives an impassioned speech and punctuates it with a punch in the face, which is something the Klingon Johnny Cochran once pulled, and now everybody does that. Well, in the face of that devastating argument, Picard has no choice but to summon the Royal Smart People to try to figure out this Klingon shit. In private, the Chancellor calls Worf aside and asks WTF. None of this affects your standing in the Federation, Worf, and this is just some issue of the past of a man long dead. Except as Worf had mentioned, that's not the Klingon way, is it? They take the past very seriously. This thing lasts 7 generations. I mean, that's like if your great-great-great-grandfather conspired with John Wilkes Booth. Everyone would still think that you were a horrible person today, no matter what you and your family have done since. You could save 15 babies from a burning hospital, and old ladies would still hit you with their umbrellas and spit at you. But the Chancellor is persuasive. Forget about all this and just go home, Worf. Duras has a similar message for Kurn.
I know who you are, Kurn.
You're really Batman. Like Worf, Kurn refuses to abandon this either, so assassins jump him. If I could just get to my utility belt. Kurn is rescued, but now that his true identity is known, he'll share in Worf's execution. With the way the Chancellor was talking, it's clear that this will not end any other way. But nevertheless, the crew is trying, pulling up old logs from Federation ships, Klingon records, and a recently captured Romulan ship that reveals that someone had sent the information that they needed in order to breach the defenses, using Mog's old access codes. Except a comparison shows that the records were altered. Gasp! This must be the part where Sam Waterston comes in and delivers the smackdown. The realization of this hits home for Worf.
If it is true, it is not just Duras, but the High Council itself that is my enemy. Captain.
Permission to run away screaming. You don't have to ask twice, Worf. Actually, Worf asks if Picard would take Kurn's place as his whatever. I lost track of all these Klingon terms. Picard naturally points out that someone younger and stronger and more open to being stabbed might be a better choice, but Worf insists that Picard is the best option, and Picard agrees, even giving the traditional Klingon phrase of acceptance. He's a man that does his homework. Speaking of which, Dr. Crusher has learned from the records that a Klingon woman was found with Worf after the massacre, K-List. They'll have to find her fast because Duras is busy in council flinging it around.
Mog often spoke of his admiration for the Romulans, their culture, their women.
Let me cover up my boner here. Picard requests a recess to go look for this K-List, who is unwilling to help until he asks if Mog was a traitor, and then she takes umbrage. But she can prove nothing. So that good news, Kronos continues raining joy on him by having 2 of Duras' assassins jump him right outside of her door. He manages to take one down, but, well, A for effort. Nonsense, I'm just making him overconfident so I can... Oh, not in the face! Luckily for Picard, an elderly woman was nearby to rescue him. It's K-List, and the sight of her convinces Picard that he has one move left, a bluff. If Duras tried to kill him after seeing K-List, he must fear what he thinks she knows. Maybe that will shake the truth loose, like a Klingon assassin in Picard's bowels. In private, Duras threatens K-List, whom the Chancellor had once had a thing for, so in the face of that, he deliberately lets slip that it's Duras, not Worf, who should be the one on trial, and the Chancellor on the biggest loser.
It is good to see you again.
You are still fat.
In his defense, this was back when becoming Chancellor required winning a pie-eating contest. The truth about who the traitor was had to be suppressed. Duras' father had been the one, but because of his power and allies, he could have resisted that and started a civil war. And they couldn't suppress this information because the Klingons who captured the Romulan ship knew somebody was a traitor, just not who it was. So they blamed a dead man, assuming that no one would complain, since his only son no longer lived within the Empire. A perfect plan, until Worf was informed of the truth by an unknown second son. Now, why is this part of Romulan Summer when this is so obviously a Klingon story? Well, look at the chronology. 7 episodes ago was The Defector, when the Romulans put together a brilliant plan that would either reveal the loyalty of an important general or draw an important Federation starship into an ambush while violating the Treaty of Algernon, giving them grounds for war. They had covered either outcome there, and the only wrinkle turned out to be the arrival of cloaked Klingon ships and a reminder that while the Federation and the Klingons were friends, the Romulans couldn't hope to handle either one of them. So what just happens to take place recently, whatever that means? The Klingons just happened to capture a Romulan ship with information about a battle decades ago. Information which will cause one of three likely outcomes. 1. A civil war amongst the Klingons, with one side having ties to the Romulans, likely flipping the Klingons to the Romulan side, or at worst, severely crippling them so they would no longer be a threat. 2. The evidence was pinned on the father of Worf, the only Klingon with ties to the Federation, and putting him in a position to be executed. This would be the same Worf whose callous disregard led to the death of that Romulan who might very well have had important relatives given Tomalak's reaction. 3. The Federation refuses to allow the execution, and the Klingons end their friendship with the Federation. So, civil war in your enemy's ranks, force an end to an alliance, or revenge, a nice set of likely results of one of the Romulan ships just happening to fall into the wrong hands. Sure, this could be a coincidence, but as Picard said in The Defector, it's always chess with the Romulans. And that's what I think we're seeing here, a deliberate response to the incident to destabilize the Klingons or break up the Klingon Federation treaty.
You are the son of a traitor.
If you feel the fist, you must acquit. But the Chancellor makes it clear, Worf will not be allowed to present evidence exonerating himself or be allowed to succeed in his challenge. This case is fixed. So Picard steps in, refusing to allow Worf or Kurn to be executed, even if it means the end of the Alliance. In fact, the one thing that gets in the way of a Romulan victory in all of this is Worf himself. And it speaks to how his nature as an outsider has affected his Klingon outlook. Worf didn't live with the Empire. He lived with the idea of the Empire. He is more devoted to the ways of the Klingons because all he had of them was the idea and not the reality, with its corruption and politics that get in the way of honor. And it should be no surprise, really. It's the same reason that the perfect Federation seems dubious. Worf's view of the Empire is the same as Gene's view of the Federation. In their mind, it is perfect because they've never actually been there to see it firsthand, see the system in place with people involved, which means that there's going to be a lack of perfection. And before you think this is another instance of me kicking Gene in the balls, I'm saying, hey, he's an idealist, just like Worf is. And Worf's idealism is such that, even in the face of death and dishonor, Worf will stick to the honorable thing. His allegiance is to the Federation, and his heart belongs to the Empire, and he will give up everything to preserve both of them, from the Civil War of Duras and the destruction of the Alliance by Picard. It's the ultimate sacrifice, not just because it would be death, because that it's a good day to die thing only applies to honorable deaths, not one in disgrace and shame, not one that no one will remember, and if they somehow do, will regard it as the folly of the son of a traitor. It reminds me of Babylon 5's The Inquisitor. You will die alone and unremarked and forgotten. And it shows the same thing about Worf. It's easy to die nobly for a cause, but few will voluntarily die in silence and shame for one. And when he instead suggests dishonor and rejection by his people, when his death alone would not be enough to satisfy Duras, he proves, ironically, that the most committed Klingon alive is the one the Klingons have rejected. Post-episode follow-up. Annoying character goes to Wesley, but that's because Kurn just kind of made it so obvious. Final score for Sins of the Father is 8 out of 10. It starts a little weak, but once it gets moving, it really gets moving, delivering a significant look into the Klingons and to Worf's character. It also sets the stage for Picard's own in-depth understanding of Klingon ways. When dealing with Worf or other Klingons, he seems to have really gotten the picture. You'll note that in The Defector, Picard had Worf deal with the Klingons in those matters, but after this he seems more comfortable handling things himself. At the end of the episode, Picard explains to Kurn that this is merely a setback, that he must be alive and with his honor intact in order to help Worf make this right. That's why he goes along with it. That was planned to be the season-ending episode, Redemption, which would not only be that season's cliffhanger until the decision to go with the Borg story, but had it gone through with that, I wonder if instead of you-know-who coming out of the shadows, it would have been Tomalak instead, revealed as the Romulan influence.
find the constraints a bit difficult to conform to. Just a short while ago, I had to stop myself from killing Commander Riker.